I thought of you, Richard, to talk about this issue specifically, Wiz being acquired by Google, $32 billion. That's billion with a B. It's 32 Bs, which is outrageous. It's crazy. And being a part of IT Harvest, writing the security yearbook, being sort of the authority on all things vendor in the cybersecurity space, I wanted to turn to you. And then I thought of Chad. Chad, you saw this Wiz acquisition coming down the line. You saw it from a million miles away. When was this like that you first had
Mid to
Wiz on your
mid to
radar?
like probably third quarter of 23. Yeah.
Okay. And I remember you saying, okay, these guys are going to be big. And you were always talking about Wiz, and you started to integrate Wiz into TrustMap. And so let's start with Richard, right? I'm going to be the idiot here. And I can say that I'm playing the idiot, but the truth is, I am. I'm depending on you guys to educate me and educate the person who is listening to this in their car or wherever they are. So, Richard, did you see this coming? Were you surprised by this?
Yeah, yeah. I was surprised because last year we went through this before. So when I saw the rumors that it was happening, and these rumors came out yesterday, I assumed, well, they're just playing the same game, right? Getting everybody excited and then calling it off for some reason. Of course, we never got the backstory of what happened last year when Google and Wiz were dancing, and Google offered 23 billion, which was amazing, right? That was twice what their current valuation was at their last amazing funding round. And this is easily the most meteoric rise for any cybersecurity company ever. Um, Maybe scales with inflation and all that, but come on, I mean, Checkpoint did go public. They went from zero to public in 3 years, but they were nowhere as big, right? They had $30 million in revenue their second year, not 100 million like Wiz did. So it's just the pace of things, right? Wiz had a really simple to deploy, really simple concept that customers valued immediately, right? It was, hey, is deploy it in minutes, and all of a sudden you can see everything in the cloud. So it did extremely well with that. Had the right backing from CyberStarts from day one. CyberStarts is known for taking Israeli startups to that next level quickly. Um, but I was kind of hoping, because the team at Wiz, this isn't their first rodeo. They've sold companies before, and you would think that they would want to be a standalone public company someday, and join the ranks of Palo Alto and Zscaler and Fortinet, CrowdStrike, and just keep playing in that game and contributing. And I kind of hope they would be too. But now they're going to be part of Google.
Chad, for the person that's listening to this who they've never heard of Wiz, what is Wiz? What is the concept of Wiz? Richard just said that the concept is pretty simple to grasp.
Yeah, I mean, it is simple. I mean, at the base of it, what they've done really well is allow customers to measure their security vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, and things that can lead to real threats and risks in the organization for cloud assets. That was their bread and butter. When they came out of the gate, that's what they did. And I think they did a really good job of kind of pre-warming up their customer base before they went and did, public availability, let's call it, right? And so they came out with a good base of customers. They could ratchet up that revenue very quickly in the first year as a result of that active customer base, and use that as a launch pad to multiply their growth over the next several years, all the way to where we got today. And I think, by the way, what Richard said, what was it, a year ago, Richard, roughly, when Google was courting Wiz 23 billion? Well, look at, they got another almost 10, call it 9 billion more in 12 months, which is incredible amount of value add in that short of time.
Why
Every
is that?
investor,
What changed in the last year that made that valuation skyrocket in that way?
Richard, what do you think?
They continued to grow, right? And we've all seen the story before, right? When whoever it was, Google or Microsoft, offered whatever billions for Yahoo, and Yahoo turned them down. And then obviously they should have taken that deal. And so we all, one of the outcomes that quite frequently is seen is they go public and for 5 billion, even though they could have sold last year for 23 billion. But I think what happened is that they continued the momentum. So if they were worth that much then, and they continue to grow at the rate they've been growing, then they're easily worth however much growth that was, right? Turn ARR into market cap kind of thing. I watched them and I was amazed that such a young company could handle hiring 150 people a month. And just imagine what their HR processes are in order to be able to grow a team that size. Now, it reminded me of the dot-com boom when I first joined PwC. We were hiring 5,000 people a month. And, we did that by distributed every office, of which there were 1,000 of, had to hire 100 people kind of thing. So the processes they built to be a fast growing company is pretty phenomenal. And I think if Google probably could learn something from that, right? They're no longer a fast growing company like that. So they may want to be inspired by that ability to move into new areas and grow quickly into them.
Is that because of their venture backing? Who did they have in their corner that helped them grow that fast to do those quick hirings and take care of the operational stuff and the management? And who was their knight in shining armor?
I don't know. I think it's the management team that gets all the credit.
The internal management team?
Internal management, the founders.
Wow.
To get all the credit. They set that up and recognized quickly that it was happening and set themselves up for success, which is a little easier to do after you get a couple $100 million in venture backing. You can then step back and think about how you want to build your company. Whereas bootstrap companies have to think about where the next dollar is coming from.
Right. So it turns out that in business, money solves everything.
That's always
It also creates additional problems, though. You got to be careful.
Like
it can
what?
be a double-edged sword. Yeah.
Yeah, like what? What kind of problems would it?
Well, for example, if you don't execute on funding, you raise a couple $100 million in funding, or maybe not even that much. Maybe it's 50 million in funding. You have to be able to deploy that capital in a very smart way to achieve the results that those investors are looking to achieve in a very specific amount of time. And so that's the other side of the equation here.
All right, so let's talk about the management a little bit, because somebody's out there trying to build a similar company and they're going to want to replicate what Wiz did. Once you see this kind of news, the first thing that people are going to be thinking, how did they do that and how do I replicate it? So was this a fluke, or is this something that you think that managers and teams can learn from?
I personally think it's what Richard said earlier. It's the founding team. And the key word there is team, right? So they had, I think, was it 3 or 4, essentially more than 4 founding team members? Okay, well, there you go. So, and they didn't just, decide to have an idea and go for it. They clearly had a very well drawn out, strict strategy that they held each other accountable for, and they executed very well. And there was an interview I saw. I don't remember all the details of it, or I read, I should say. I think I read this interview from one of their co-founders a while back, and that's essentially what they have established is each person had a very distinct role in that founding team, and they kept out of each other's way. And they just, also kept through that each other accountable for delivering upon the responsibilities that each individual was assigned to deliver upon, right? Mm-hmm. And so they removed the possibility of friction, but they also increased the opportunity for accountability.
You guys know their backgrounds, the founding members?
They sold their previous company, Adalom, to Microsoft, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So an Israeli startup. Once again, Microsoft buys them. I forget how much it was for, but it was sizable. So when they got back together, they could think about how we're going to do this. This time we want it to be big. They spent a lot of time as Microsoft executives as well. So they saw, technology companies at scale. So
Mhm.
they hadn't yet built anything as big as they experienced at Microsoft.
Mhm, mhm. So that's the secret sauce. Maybe it's hard to compete with people who come from that environment, who are able to replicate what they've seen at these bigger companies, and they just sort of spun it up. I mean, if you really think about it that way, it's kind of Microsoft versus Google here. Have you seen any other companies sort of this is a conspiracy theory, I'll admit. It's a complete conspiracy theory, but they say, "Hey, why don't you guys go off, do your own thing, and then when you get big enough, we'll talk. Maybe we'll bring you
Happens all
back
the
into
time.
the fold."
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Cisco does that all the time.
What's that called? Is there a name for that, or is that just kind
Uh,
of a
I don't know, corporate nepotism. I don't know.
ah?
It's okay to do. It's totally okay to do, right? It's and it happens a lot with Microsoft as well.
Hmm.
Founders sell to them, stay on for a year, get their buyout or whatever that sweetened offer is, and then they move on and do it all over again. And I think that is key to the success is that you had the senior management with senior experience. Because at a lot of startups, if it's your first startup, if you're out of Y Combinator, which means you're going to be 19 years old and you're building something, and eventually after your A round or B round, the investors are going to replace you with somebody with gray hair. Just happens so often. That's just going to happen, right? And or Semantic, right? Eubanks was replaced by a 20-year IBM executive, John Thompson. That just they always bring in the adults, right?
And are the founding members still? They're still the people who are running Wiz, right?
Yep, all
Okay,
four of them.
so they're very
Yeah,
happy today.
products,
They're
head of products, head of technology, CEO, and one other role.
hmm hmm
I'll add this to what Richard was saying, and Josh, what you were kind of asking about. I think a lot of companies that get to a certain scale, Cisco, Microsoft, Google being great examples, is that innovation begins to stymie a little bit, right? And so if they have people that exit those companies, it's almost like an external incubator in a way. If that company they left, like a Microsoft, Google, so on, um, keeps that relationship with those founders, right? Then they have perhaps an advantage. Now, I'm not saying that innovation inside of large companies is dead. It certainly isn't. There are definitely pockets of really amazing innovation happening at these large enterprises. That's how new products get released. But more often than not, when you see a huge success, like in the case of Wiz, that's not going to be because of internal innovation at a Fortune 500 company, as an example.
Yep, and that's the way it's been forever in my experience. The large companies, yes, they'll have great product teams and they'll listen to their customers and innovate in order to deliver what the customers ask for. Fantastic. But as soon as somebody says this is all wrong, we are doing it wrong, we should be doing it this way, that's when it has to be a fresh founder startup who might leave Microsoft and might actually create the company that he or she thinks would fit into Microsoft really, really well, and then sell it back to them after they demonstrated, hey, look at you can, you know, whatever, totally revamp your word processor, and replace the revenue you're going to lose from the old people using it with the new kids on the block that, which brings me to the competition between Google and Microsoft. So unlike Google and Amazon, which, both the Google and Amazon and Microsoft had huge computing infrastructure and they all came at creating cloud services the same way. It's like, wow, we've just invested hundreds of millions in creating this flexible, elastic system. We could rent space on that to everybody else. We could get back into what Boeing Computer Services was in when I got out of school, timeshare computing. And but the difference here is that between Microsoft and Google, Microsoft created Bing in order to get a piece of Google's action, right? They didn't do too well at it, but they got into the advertising business. So Google historically has thought of them as their main competitor, though in actuality, the main competitor is actually Amazon and Amazon Web Services. So you got the three of them. And I'm wondering if, I don't think, we're going to have any antitrust issues at all because it's giant, massive, almost $2 trillion Google buying a little tiny cybersecurity company. Not a big deal. But that little tiny cybersecurity company grew off the back of AWS customers, right? Because they're cloud, and AWS is, 80% of the cloud, especially for the enterprise. Whereas Google might have an 80%, cloud presence in universities. That's not the same thing as having the enterprise. And so now all of a sudden, the major cloud security provider that for AWS is owned by their major competitor, Google. What happens? And I'm not sure, but AWS could mess that deal up if they wanted to.
Is this a loss for Microsoft?
Microsoft has been making I think it's more of a poke in the eye from Google, because Microsoft has been pretending that they're the biggest cybersecurity vendor by giving away stuff that nobody in their right mind would pay for because it's subpar, right? So here they are claiming now they're up to 20 billion in revenue from cybersecurity products, even though, they haven't actually ever proved that to us. And Google just making a massive, cutting edge cybersecurity acquisition, right? It's not like Microsoft buying CrowdStrike. That would be a big deal, right? Because they would indicate that they really were concerned about security on their endpoints if they did that. No, they're going to create just barely good enough antivirus to put AVG and Avast and Norton LifeLock out of business, unless they combine forces, as they did. So, I think it's a good play, good anti-Microsoft play, because don't forget, Google does compete with Microsoft. They want to be the one to have the Google desktop and Google workspaces compared to Microsoft's Office 365. They've got an editor that's fantastic. They've got a spreadsheet that's, I think, is better than Excel. They got everything you need. PowerPoint, you got all that. And it's all online. It's modern. It's actually web-based. So yeah, I think that's a good move on their part.
Are they what Microsoft would be if they got a CrowdStrike? Like, does this make Google now a serious player in cybersecurity? Do you think of them now as a cybersecurity company?
Yeah, because the Mandiant acquisition didn't do that, right? Mandiant gave them street cred because now they got some really good researchers, but it didn't give them the product so much. But now they've got best of breed product.
Is Wiz going to come off of AWS, and are they going to be on Google's cloud, or do you think Google is going to allow them to remain on AWS while providing the rest of the service? I mean, that would be crazy, but how do these things work?
They have to stay on AWS, right? Or else they just paid $32 billion for no revenue.
And if you think about that, it's a great diversification play for Google. In a way, they can now get revenue from AWS customers.
Huh. So this is good news not only for Google, but this is good news for AWS, for Amazon as well.
I don't know, because Amazon has a bunch of security products, and a lot of it, and they've got a whole marketplace full of security products. They have a security conference. They won't appreciate being pushed aside for market share or mind share, at least. So, but hey, maybe that's great for the industry because maybe they'll start acquiring. Trouble with Amazon acquiring, because they got so many partners. If they acquire one, they're going to piss off the others. So
yeah, the tension is so thick you can cut it with a knife. It's like thick butter, and I'm excited to see what happens next. So is this a done deal, or is there any chance that this acquisition might not go through?
Ooh. I could see that. We'd have to see the legal terms, but yeah, there's always caveats why it won't go through. If the stock market crashes and Google stock isn't worth as much as it used to be, maybe that could kill the deal. could be lots of votes.
So, Chad, when you were looking at Wiz a long time ago, what was it about Wiz that made you feel like they were going to be big? And what, because you weren't surprised by this acquisition,
No,
what was it that you saw in them?
it, primarily what I was hearing on the street with customers. What I mean by that,
Your customers or customers in general in the cybersecurity market?
both, really. Yeah. So we were getting requests for Wiz integration, and as I was talking to, former colleagues and also customer prospects, talking about what tools they were using today, Wiz was definitely top of mind back then, and so it was pretty evident that they were going to go somewhere and go somewhere very quickly, because rarely do you come across a product where almost everybody is acquiring it or talking about acquiring it. And Richard, you probably saw the same thing over the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
With it.
Completely. Yeah. It was like kind of a no brainer, for a while it was, and people give Orca credit for coming to market earlier than Wiz. But Wiz just, got the backing, had the team, they had all A players across the board. So yeah, so they won. The other one to watch that's very similar is Cyera, who similar thing, right? I think they took in $200 million in funding last year, and they're killing it. And Cyera, think about it, if Wiz is configuration management, Cyera is data discovery and classification. But unfortunately for Cyera, over a year ago, Wiz introduced their own data security classification solution. So Cyera is a competitor to Wiz, but specialist, and it is different, and they are different buying centers. The network cloud architects by Wiz, the data privacy chief digital officers by Cyera.
What does this mean for customers, for CISOs, CTOs? Is anything going to change for them?
I don't think so. Not in the short term, anyway. Certainly
Maybe
not.
things get better, maybe more integrations, maybe more unification.
I think that depends where a customer's stack is in the cloud, right? So if they're in Google, you have to be very happy with this announcement. If you're in AWS, perhaps there's some uncertainty, which we already discussed. But I think, before we see any major direction one way or the other, first, this deal has to have ink on paper and closed. And then two, it'll be interesting to see where Google plans to take Wiz. Because as Richard said earlier, the Mandiant thing was really interesting at first, but then the excitement fizzled out, I think, fairly quickly. And there wasn't a lot of announcement from Google on what they were planning to do on a more broader market perspective with that acquisition. Whereas Wiz is something, obviously, as a product, is very scalable, and they offer quite a robust cloud services already. So that is going to become a very interesting to watch for everyone on what Google plans to do and how that could or could not change the current relationship over the next several years with AWS.
There's someone who's like a real. Oh, sorry, Richard, you're going to say something. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, keep in mind, there's no connection between a company that makes billions and billions in profits from selling ads and anything else. There's just, the business processes are totally different. The margins are totally different. There's no better margins than they make on selling ads. So when it comes push to shove, ad revenue is going to come first, right? And so Google is anti-privacy, right? They need to see all your data, so they give away a lot of free products so they can see your data. And Wiz is a security company. That those two are going to clash if they ever hit the market together. And Wiz is a successful growing security company that probably invested a lot in customer support. So I bet you anything, a Wiz customer can call a phone number and talk to a human. And have you ever tried to do that with Google? Yeah, doesn't happen.
Does it make Google a more secure product? Because they're all in the cloud. They do a lot of cloud. Does this make them better, or do they just see this as an additional revenue stream?
So if they could deploy Wiz for their own IT operations, and they've got, I don't know how many tens of thousands of employees, they've got big IT operations, so they need it, right? And they've had incidents in the past that that Wiz will help them avoid.
Like what?
Google Aurora, 2010, Chinese just owned Google, stole all their source code, and compromised all their biggest customers. It was a disaster.
So this is good news for customers. There was someone I spoke to. If you're listening and you can hear me, I'm sure it was a guest that I had on the show a long time ago who was just so anti Google. And they're like, even if you met, so everybody knows that I usually meet guests in Google Meets first. Our shop is a Google shop.
Yeah.
We do everything in Google. I love Google. And it just makes this person livid. And I wish I could remember who this was. It's like I can't picture the face. I can't remember the name, but I remember talking to this person and they were like, if anybody does anything in Google, you're an idiot, because especially if you're in security, because if you're claiming that you're in security and you're all about security and you're using Google, something's wrong with your head. And they would not touch it with a 10-foot pole.
You just maybe use a Chrome browser to record this podcast, right?
Right, because Riverside only I can't if I were to not be a Google shop for security reasons or for whatever reason, I got to close my shop, and I'm sorry, I'm just not willing to do that. But should people like me breathe a sigh of relief, and should people like my friend, he who shall not be named because I can't remember his name, should that person now feel better about using Google now that they've clearly put cloud security in the forefront?
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between cloud security and privacy.
Yeah, so that's the issue, I suppose. It's you know what? Now that I'm thinking about this could have been Adam Stone.
That could very well be.
Yeah, that sounds like something that, shout out to Adam Stone. It could be something that he's the privacy guru, and as a matter of fact, I would be interested in what his take is on this. But so you're saying that this does not touch privacy at all, where the concerns people may have around privacy may not have been addressed here.
The data discovery. So, using Wiz's technology, their customers could find out where all their privacy related information is and encrypt it, keep it away from Google. They can discover, and then with the cloud configuration, you could discover if Google has access to your private information stores, which would be really useful to have, and then you can shut it off.
So this is just good news for Google and good news for the Wiz team. Doesn't seem like a whole lot's going to change for the customers.
Yeah, not immediately. You don't have to rush to the door, and you don't have to start talking to Orca. Though you could if you wanted to. Yeah. That's one thing about, if something is super, super easy to deploy to the point where you can deploy it in a proof of concept mode during the first call with the salesperson, then it's also super easy to flip and go to somebody else. It's not as sticky.
So Richard, you are a victim of your own success. You have prognosticated and on this show, and you were right. I think your success rate is pretty high. So I'm going to dub you the prognosticator of prognosticators here and ask you a very unfair question. Who is the next Wiz?
It's a long way off. I've already talked about Sierra, right? Who's going to be a good company, but I don't think they'll be a Wiz at all. And I think it'll be, it'll arise out of the AI world that we're in now. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's none of the 96 vendors in AI security that I'm tracking. It'll be somebody else, and they'll come up with something that, just does a better job at something really normal and everyday, right? And it's going to be amazing when it happens, and they'll get 100 million in funding because it's AI and security, and it'll take us all by storm.
Chad, what does this mean for TrustMap and your customers?
The AI or Wiz?
Wiz.
Oh,
Or is there an AI? Wink, wink. Or,
let's stick to the Wiz topic here.
all right, all right. My
Yeah,
job is to get the information out of you. Your job is to keep secrets. I get
I see what's
it.
happening. For our customers, this is great news because, and again, we don't know what 6 months from now is going to look like. Wiz inside of Google, right? How are they going to deploy it, make it available? Will it be available through Google Cloud customers, for example? And if they do, I mean, that will enable us to, with a checkbox, customer through our interface, a checkbox, they could activate Wiz. Today, they have to enter API keys and, authentication string. But a checkbox is even faster. So that would be amazing.
I'm really surprised that AI wasn't a bigger part of this conversation. I would think that if there was going to be a $32 billion acquisition, it would have been an AI company. Is Wiz equipped with AI? I mean, is AI a part of this at all?
Well, think about Google for a moment. They're probably not going to, subpar their own AI investments, and they are in the best position to create an AI engine with all the data that they have at their fingertips, and they've got far more developers than I'm sure Wiz could even imagine to have.
But what about the other way around? With Google using its AI technology and bolting that onto Wiz, what does that do?
That could be amazing.
It would be amazing, yeah. Write a storybook. I mean, the opportunities are probably numerous on what you could do in that scenario, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Reconfigure my AWS infrastructure to save me 90% of the costs.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Wow. What else? What else could happen? Well, anything could happen, I suppose.
Anything, yeah. I mean, it's too early to hypothesize right now.
Mirror my AWS. Look at Google is going to have every AWS customer's cloud configuration. Take their AI, take Genie 3 or 4 or 5, whatever we're up to, and refactor it into a Google Cloud deployment.
Yeah. The possibilities are endless, like Gemini, Genie, and in cloud security. I mean, that would even have trickle down effects in your line of business, Chad. I mean, even your customers may see the benefits of that, of an AI driven Wiz bolted on. So AI bolted on to Wiz, Wiz bolted on to TrustMap. That could do a lot for customers in terms of understanding their security posture, understanding where they are, and then of course being able to build a roadmap. And I mean, AI plus security, it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Use cases are, I was just going to say, use cases are endless. But I want to be pragmatic here and cautious because the deal isn't completely done and gone through legal yet. So
right, this could all just be dust in the wind for all we know. I hope not, but we could be doing another show in a week talking about why did the Wiz acquisition not go through.
Exactly. Yeah. Richard, great seeing you again.
Likewise, Chad. Really good.
Take care. All right, Richard, last thoughts.
So super exciting for the industry, right? To have a massive acquisition like this. Every acquisition spawns new startups and inspires investors, right? Because it's been a long time since an investor like CyberStarts can talk about, returning the entire value of the fund in a single deal, which is what they all attempt to do. So here's, it happened in cybersecurity, and I'm sure there were a lot of participants in investing in Wiz, so they're all pretty proud of themselves today, and kudos to them in the first place, because it was a risk. It was always a risk. So I've got high hopes for the industry having a really good year. And I look forward to seeing all those. Of course, I'm speaking in my own self-interest because I'm looking forward to seeing all the startups and being able to track them and help people understand them.
If this is an indicator of something, this would be an indicator of what? That other companies should be paying attention to.
Yeah. It yet again, it highlights something that John Pescatori told me the first day on the job at Gartner. And he said, security will never be the next big thing, but it'll always be part of the next big thing. And we see that played out constantly, right? And this is the final straw for the cloud, demonstrating that security generated, the cloud generated all these security opportunities. And Zscaler is another one, and all of these vendors are that. The next wave is going to be an AI. We know that's going to happen. Right? Palo Alto is already assuming it's happened, right? And they're talking about claiming their share of the $34 billion AI security market, which is silly because the market doesn't exist yet. The players are all lined up, ready to go, spending people's money, but customers aren't buying from any of them yet.
Or the same is true for media in cybersecurity. Talking about cybersecurity is never going to be the next big thing in media, but it's always a part of the conversation, and it always will be. So with that, Richard, thanks for stopping by. As always, good to see you. And as things evolve, I might ping you again because you are the man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. I'm just going to stop it here. And
Cool.